Welcome to this exploration of one of the most unsettling incidents in upstate New York history. Please let me know where you're watching from and what time you're listening to this narration in the comments section before we start. What locations and what hours of the day or night these recorded stories reach are of interest to us. On the 7th of October 1961, the box was delivered to the Albany County Historical Society. The postmark was tracked back to Ravens Peak, a small hamlet tucked away in the foothills of the Adirondack Mountains. But the sender was nameless, and the address was weathered and scrawled with ink that had long faded to a pale sepia. Within, a leather-bound diary with brittle pages and distorted corners from what looked like water damage was wrapped in a yellowed newspaper dated 1923. Just 5 words, printed on contemporary stationery, made up the accompanying note: "The truth deserves to be known." Throughout, the handwriting changed, starting with elegant, measured penmanship and gradually deteriorating into frantic, jagged scrolls by the final entries, which the Society's head archivist, Dr. Eleanor Winters, would later characterize as unsettling in ways that defy rational explanation. The stains that marred some of the pages were more intriguing. According to preliminary analysis, they were a mix of several chemicals used in embalming procedures in the early 20th century, as well as what seemed to be cosmetic residue, and most unsettling of all, proof of what Dr. Winters described in her notes as physical contact with preserved human tissue. The following is the recorded story of Margaret Blackwood, a 27-year-old mortuary assistant who worked from January to November, 1,922 inches. The little New York hamlet of Ravens Peak. A journey into what can only be characterized as the lowest recesses of human obsession and loneliness is revealed by her diary, which is cross-referenced with death records, local newspaper archives, and interviews with the few surviving neighbors who recalled the Blackwood name. After Margaret's father died of influenza in 1918, the Blackwood family relocated to Ravens Peak. According to town records, they bought a small 2-story home on Willow Street, next to Hargrove and Sons Mortuary, the town's sole funeral facility. According to property papers, the residences were only separated by a small alley, and Margaret's bedroom window faced the mortuary's back entrance, a location that would prove disastrous. Early in 1921, Margaret started working at the morgue as a cleaning worker, according to employment documents kept in the county archives. In his business ledger, proprietor Mr. Elias Hargrove wrote that she was uncommonly fastidious, with an attention to detail rare in one so young. By the fall of that year, Margaret had been trained to help with basic preparation tasks, such as cleaning and dressing the deceased, putting on makeup, and arranging the hair. In a 1945 letter to her sister that was unearthed among family documents given to the Historical Society, Margaret's mother, Elizabeth Blackwood, wrote that she had found her calling. Though I confess it gives me a chill to think of her spending so many hours among the departed. In hindsight, the entry that opens Margaret's diary on the 12th of January 1922 bears hints of what was to come. Mother says I spend too much time at Hargrove's. She doesn't understand that the dead make better company than most of the living in this town. They don't judge. They don't pry. Mr. Hargrove has entrusted me with the women now. I wash them, prepare them. Sometimes when I'm alone with them, I tell them my secrets. Today I stayed late to finish with Mrs. Eleanor Reed. Her skin was like porcelain under my fingertips. I fixed her hair the way I imagined she might have worn it in her youth, not the severe bun her family requested. They'll never know the difference. Some people look more beautiful in death than they ever did in life. According to Eleanor Reed's death certificate, she passed away from heart failure on the 10th of January 1922 at the age of 67. Her Ravens Peak Gazette obituary characterizes her as a pillar of the community, known for her strict moral standards and unwavering dedication to the temperance movement. The juxtaposition of this public persona with Margaret's personal care of Mrs. Reed's body points to an early instance of Margaret forcing her own emotional and aesthetic framework on the dead, a pattern that would become much more intense in the months that followed. Upstate New York had an especially hard winter in 1922. Historical weather records support Margaret's description of snow that buries the world in silence. Multiple blizzards are documented in local newspapers from January and February, with drifts in some places reaching second-story windows. For days at a time, Ravens Peak was isolated from nearby villages due to roads that were regularly inaccessible. Margaret seems to have been even more isolated throughout these months. In her diary, she describes working longer and longer hours at the mortuary and growing apart from her mother, the only relative she had left. January 30th. Mother and I barely speak anymore. She sits by the fire, knitting those endless scarves for the church bazaar. When I come home at dawn, she looks at me as if I'm a stranger. Perhaps I am becoming one. I feel more myself in the quiet rooms of Hargrove's than I do in our own house. There's a peace there that I can't explain to her, a stillness that makes sense to me. By February, her journal entries start to describe a pattern that, if discovered, would have alarmed her coworkers. Margaret told Mr. Hargrove that she was catching up on cleaning chores and was lingering after hours, often until dawn. As she described in her poems, the reality was much more unsettling. February 18th. I sat with Thomas Everton tonight, just 34 years old, taken by a logging accident. His viewing isn't until tomorrow, so we had hours together. I read to him from the book of poetry I found in his jacket pocket, Keats. His hands were so strong even in death. I held one against my cheek and imagined what it would feel like to be touched by such hands in life. Before I left, I took a lock of his hair and placed it in my locket, something to remember him by. The death of 34-year-old Thomas Everton in a logging accident on the 16th of February 1922 was verified by local newspaper records. According to his obituary, he was unmarried, devoted to literature, and his favorite volume of Keats' poetry was buried alongside him. One pocket watch, one handkerchief, a wallet containing $3, and several papers were among the personal belongings that were returned to his family, according to a footnote in the mortuary ledger. The fact that a book of poetry is not mentioned raises the possibility that Margaret retained this item. Following Everton's burial, Margaret returned to the cemetery. According to a subsequent entry dated February 20th, I visited Thomas today, the fresh earth still mounded over him. I placed wildflowers where his head would be. I wonder if he can feel me there, standing above him. I told him I would come back. Margaret's entries became more regular and more worrisome as winter gave way to spring. She starts talking about her interactions with the dead, documenting in-depth tales of one-sided discussions in which she would spend hours talking to the corpses. Her descriptions of setting the bodies up in sitting positions and supporting them so she could sit across from them like proper tea with a friend, as she wrote on March 30th, are more concerning. I've become quite good at positioning them without leaving marks. Mr. Hargrove taught me about the way bodies settle, about rigor mortis and its timing. What he doesn't know is how useful this knowledge has become for my evening visits. Edward Chambers sat perfectly upright last night. I brought 2 cups of tea. I drank mine, of course, but placed his near his hand. The steam rose between us like conversation. Death records indicate that on the 28th of March, 1922, 42-year-old banker Edward Chambers passed away from pneumonia. Records from the morgue during this time period reveal an odd trend: grievances regarding differences in the nighttime placement of dead. It seems that Mr. Hargrove ascribed these to settlement or the resolution of rigor mortis. He even made a joke about the mortuary being haunted, according to one note in Margaret's diary. Margaret, if only he knew who the real ghost was, she wrote. I move among the living like a shadow, but with the dead, I am solid, real. Further background is given via an interview with Harriet Simmons in 1962, who was a secretary at Hargrove & Sons at the time. There were rumors, of course. Small towns run on gossip. People said Miss Blackwood was odd, that she kept strange hours. Some claimed to have seen lights in the mortuary at midnight, movement behind the curtains. But Mr. Hargrove trusted her completely. Said she had a gift for making the departed look peaceful. If anything seemed out of place, he'd laugh it off. The dead are restless sometimes, he'd say. Late April marks a turning point in Margaret's writing. The handwriting becomes more and more chaotic as the diary entry from April 23rd fills multiple pages. They brought him in today. Never have I seen such perfection. Jonathan Caldwell, age 30, pneumonia, dark hair that curls at the temples, long fingers like a pianist's. His face has a gentleness even death couldn't erase. Mr. Hargrove said his fiancée is devastated. They were to be married in June. When everyone left, I stayed with him. I told him about my life, my dreams. I fixed his collar, smoothed his jacket. When I touched his hand, I could have sworn there was warmth there still. According to his death certificate, Jonathan Caldwell passed away on the 22nd of April 1922 from pneumonia. His funeral was attended in large numbers according to newspaper reports, which also noted that the bride-to-be was inconsolable as she laid a white rose on her beloved's casket. What Margaret's diary reveals and what the people of the town were unaware of is that during the 2 nights between Jonathan's preparation and his funeral, Margaret engaged in what she called our courtship. The details are too graphic to go into detail, but they describe how she would sit with him for hours on end, cologne on his skin, adjust his clothes, and even put lip rouge on his mouth. According to town records, he and Eliza Porter were engaged, and their wedding was scheduled for June 17. She writes about bringing in a photograph and playing music, swaying with him in my arms to the sounds of distant violins. Most disturbing is her essay from April 25, the day before his passing. Tonight will be our last, together. I brought in fresh flowers and wine. I kissed him good night, properly, the way a fiancé should. His lips were cold, but in my mind, they warmed under mine. I told him I would find him again, somehow. An interesting entry can be found in the mortuary's April 26th expense ledger. Additional cosmetic work required for J. Caldwell before viewing, applied at family's request. This implies that someone, most likely Mr. Hargrove, saw the cosmetics Margaret had applied without permission and fixed them, attributing the discrepancy to a request from the family. Margaret's actions over the spring and summer of 1922 follow a pattern that corresponds with the kinds of bodies that were delivered by Hargrove and Sons. Her nighttime visits became focused on young men, usually under 40, who died not from aging but from disease or accidents. Their names, ages, causes of death, and what she thought were their special qualities are all painstakingly documented in her diary. A button, a length of hair, or perhaps personal belongings that would not be forgotten, were among the souvenirs she gathered from each. In her bedroom, she stored these in a wooden box, under a loose floorboard. According to what she wrote, May 15th, I've arranged my collection more carefully now, each memento labeled, each memory preserved. When I hold these small pieces of them, I can almost feel their presence again. Mother nearly found the box yesterday. I must be more careful. She wouldn't understand that these are not just objects, they're promises, connections that even death cannot sever. During this time, Margaret's pale skin and preoccupied demeanor were noted in town gossip that was archived in social columns of the local newspaper. A June 1922 Ravens Peak Gazette entry states that Miss Blackwood, once a regular at Sunday services, has not been seen at church in months. Her mother reports she sleeps most days and works through the night. Further information is provided by a 1959 Local History Project interview with Ida Thornton, who taught piano lessons across the street from the Blackwood residence. That summer, it must have been 22, I would see the Blackwood girl coming home at the strangest hours, dawn mostly. White as a sheet, but with a look on her face I can only describe as satisfied, like someone who's just come from a lover's arms. We all assumed there was a young man somewhere, though no one ever saw him. If only we'd known. Margaret started fusing her fantasy world with reality in increasingly risky ways by July, according to her diary. She describes putting a little rouge on the faces of the dead guys she liked, arranging them in more realistic positions, and even putting on elaborate scenes arranging dinner tables or card games in the prep room after work. July 10th. I borrowed candles from the storage closet, ones used for Catholic wakes. They cast the most beautiful light, softer than the electric bulbs Mr. Hargrove insists on using. Tonight I prepared a proper dinner for Daniel Sullivan and myself. I set the table on one of the slabs, covered with a blue cloth from the viewing room. I brought food, Nothing he could eat, of course, but the ritual of serving, of sitting across from one another, felt right. His eyes, though fixed, seemed to follow me as I moved about the room. According to Daniel Sullivan's death certificate, on the 7th of July 1922, a manufacturing worker who was 28 years old lost his life in an industrial accident. A significant event took place in late July when Mr. Hargrove brought on a new apprentice, William Foster, who was recently back from medical school in Albany and was listed in town records as being 22 years old. Margaret's early journal comments regarding William are contemptuous, if not antagonistic. The new boy watches me too closely. Mr. Hargrove has him checking my work, as if I haven't been doing this perfectly for over a year now. William asked why I requested the night shift exclusively. I told him I find peace in the quiet hours. The look he gave me suggested he didn't believe me. There is a growing tension in Margaret's essays throughout August. William starts to show up more often in her entries, but always as an unwanted intrusion into her personal life. The railroad worker Robert Miller, according to death records, was 26 years old when he died in a track accident on the 14th of August 1922. He came in early today and nearly caught me with Robert Miller. I had just put Robert back in his proper position when William walked in. He asked why the photograph was playing. I said it helps me concentrate. An entry from August 23rd reveals the increasing paranoia in Brain. William moved a chair I had placed beside Richard Bennett's table. He said it was in the way. He knows. He must know. I can see it in his eyes when he looks at me. Suspicion, maybe disgust. But how could he understand what I've found here? The peace, the connection. No one who hasn't experienced it could comprehend. Margaret's notes from September indicate that she was growing more careless and might have been having a mental breakdown. Even when other people were in adjacent rooms, she recounts whispering to the departed. She describes using linens, candles, and tiny vials of embalming chemicals that she would open to remember the scent of my true home in her bedroom at home, which she created by borrowing from the morgue. September 8th. Mother found one of my bottles today. Asked what that terrible smell was. I told her it was a new perfume. She looked at me so strangely, like she was seeing me for the first time. "You've changed, Margaret," she said. "I hardly know you anymore." I wanted to tell her that I finally found myself, found where I belong. But how could she understand? She fears death. I've embraced it. The September 17th entry marks another crucial turn. William followed me tonight. I saw him across the street when I left at dawn. He thinks I don't notice, but his shoes make a distinctive sound on the cobblestones. What does he suspect? What could he possibly understand about the connections I've made, the love I've found here? Hargrove & Sons' September 10th ledger entry states, inventory discrepancies in preparation supplies. Second occurrence this month. Must implement better tracking system. The weeks that follow reveal Margaret's growing paranoia. She describes taking detours home, hiding her diary in various places, and observing William from windows. Notations in Mr. Hargrove's ledger from this time period indicate that her work started to suffer. According to an entry from October 3rd, Miss Blackwood reprimanded for inconsistencies in preparation. Second warning this month. October 5th, Mr. Hargrove questioned me today about the Ricks girl. Said her mother complained that her hair was arranged differently at the viewing than how they had requested. I apologized, said I must have misunderstood the instructions. In truth, the style they wanted was all wrong for her face. I gave her something softer, more becoming. They should have thanked me. Now Mr. Hargrove says William will be supervising my work for a while, as if I were a child, as if I haven't learned to make the dead more beautiful than they ever were in life. Late October marks the culmination of Margaret's recorded decline. Her diary post dated October 25th, which filled several pages with frenetic writing, characterized James Thornton as 30 years old, drowned in Raven's Lake, dark-haired, face untouched by the water, perfect in his stillness. The body was delivered to the mortuary. James and I danced tonight. I brought my mother's gramophone and played the Tchaikovsky she loves so much. I wore my blue dress, the one that matches his eyes. I told him about the others, about Jonathan especially. I don't think he minded. He understands that love can take many forms. As I was fixing his collar, I heard a noise at the window. When I looked up, William's face was there, watching. Our eyes met for just a moment before he disappeared. He saw everything. According to town records, William Foster informed Mr. Hargrove and the local sheriff about suspicious activity on the 26th of October 1922. A county record statement describes what William claimed to have seen. Miss Blackwood was observed in an inappropriate and disturbing interaction with the deceased. She had arranged the body in a sitting position and appeared to be engaged in what I can only describe as an intimate conversation. She was touching the deceased's face in a manner inconsistent with professional preparation. Most alarmingly, she had applied makeup to the deceased's face that was not requested by the family and appeared to be dancing with the body. When she saw me at the window, her expression was not one of shame or embarrassment, but of anger at being interrupted. Both Margaret's last journal entries and a statement Mr. Hargrove made to local authorities detail the ensuing altercation. Margaret was promptly fired from her job. According to town records, her mother opposed this intervention, stating she would take care of her daughter at home, but the sheriff, after speaking with the town doctor, recommended that she be assessed for nervous exhaustion and possible melancholia. Further background is given by an interview with Sophia Hargrove, the wife of Elias Hargrove, in 1960. My husband came home that night, white as a sheet, said he'd had to let Margaret go. That young William had caught her doing unnatural things with one of the bodies. Elias didn't want to believe it at first. He'd trusted her completely. But William was insistent, and there'd been those little inconsistencies for months. Things moved, supplies missing. Elias blamed himself for not seeing it sooner. He said Margaret didn't even try to deny it when confronted, just looked at them both with this cold anger and said they couldn't possibly understand. A string of progressively agitated journal entries chronicle the days after Margaret's departure. She describes being confined to her room, her mother's dismay and embarrassment, and how she watched the mortuary from her window while William took up her responsibilities. October 29th. Mother has taken to locking my door at night, as if I were a child, as if these walls could keep me from what I've discovered. She found some of my mementos today, the lock of Jonathan's hair, Thomas's poetry book. She wept as if I'd committed some terrible sin. What's happened to you? She kept asking. What darkness has taken hold of you? She doesn't understand that I've found light in the darkness, connection in the stillness. Margaret's final entry in her diary, dated the 3rd of November 1922. They've taken everything from me. Mother has locked me in my room for my own good. She found my collection, my precious mementos, and burned them in the garden. She says I'm sick, that I need rest and prayer. She doesn't understand that I've never been more alive than in those quiet hours with my beloveds. William Foster has destroyed the only happiness I've ever known. But they can't watch me forever, and there are other mortuaries in other towns, other quiet rooms where the living don't intrude. I'll find my way back to them. Some kinds of love cannot be buried. There is still historical speculation as to what transpired in the days that followed this entry. According to press reports and county records, the Blackwood residence on Willow Street was the scene of a fire on the 10th of November 1922. The fire claimed the lives of Margaret and her mother, Elizabeth Blackwood. The fire marshal's report stated that the fire seemed to have begun in Margaret's bedroom and quickly spread throughout the house, but it was inconclusive because of the significant damage. The Ravens Peak Gazette published a report on November 11. Tragic fire claims 2 lives. The residence of Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood and her daughter Margaret was consumed by flames late last night. Despite valiant efforts by the volunteer fire brigade, the structure was completely destroyed and no occupants escaped. The cause of the blaze remains under investigation, though preliminary reports suggest it may have originated from an overturned lamp or candle. On the 15th of November 1922, a peculiar addendum to this tragedy might be found in the same publication. A brief article states that, prior to the tragic fire at the Blackwood residence, the recently interred body of James Thornton was found to have been disturbed. Cemetery caretaker Harold Jenkins discovered the grave partially excavated, though the casket remained sealed. Authorities have no suspects in this macabre incident. A 1,963 interview with Harold Jenkins's son adds an upsetting detail that was not included in the newspaper report. My father told me something he never reported officially. He said when he found that disturbed grave, there were fresh flowers laid out, neat as you please, and a woman's hairpin. Blue glass, it was. Said he recognized it as the kind Miss Blackwood used to wear. But by then the fire had already happened, so he kept it to himself. No sense troubling the dead, he always said. For almost 40 years, Margaret Blackwood's diary was never found. We don't know how it survived the fire that killed its creator. According to one theory that Dr. Winters proposed in her notes, Margaret might have concealed it outside the house, possibly in preparation for an escape that she was never able to carry out. There are still many unsolved mysteries about this case, including who concealed it for so long and why they decided to deliver it anonymously to the Albany County Historical Society in 1961. By today's standards, the fire investigation was short and superficial. According to archival sources, the local authorities blamed it on unintentional reasons, most likely an unattended lamp or candle. Margaret's increasingly disturbed mental state and her dismissal from the mortuary days earlier were not mentioned in official documents. Such issues were frequently purposefully ignored in tiny towns of the time, family tragedies kept secret out of deference, or even a wish to preserve the community's reputation. William Foster made a statement that was never published, but was noted in the sheriff's notes, indicating that he had additional worries. In the days after Miss Blackwood's dismissal, I observed her watching the mortuary from her window across the alley. She would stand there for hours, particularly when we had new arrivals. On the night before the fire, I stayed late to complete preparations for the Wilson funeral. When I looked up, she was at her window again, but this time, she was smiling. It was not a pleasant expression. I mentioned this to Mr. Hargrove the next morning, but by then, news of the fire had already reached us. The diary was first examined by Dr. Eleanor Winters. Her final report, that, while we cannot verify all the events described in Miss Blackwood's writings, enough details correspond with historical records to suggest a disturbing authenticity. What we are left with is a document that traces the gradual unraveling of a mind that found connection only with those who had passed beyond connection. Whether her actions constituted mental illness, profound loneliness, or something more difficult to categorize remains open to interpretation. What is perhaps most troubling is that, in a separate personal note discovered among Dr. Winters's papers after her death in 1972, she wrote, "The Blackwood Diary haunts me not merely for the acts it describes, but for the lucidity with which Margaret perceived her own descent. She knew she was crossing boundaries, transgressing against both the living and the dead, yet she constructed a worldview in which these transgressions made perfect sense." Up until 1968, when a fire in the archive building damaged many of the documents, the Blackwood Diary was kept in the Albany County Historical Society's restricted collection. Among the things destroyed in this fire was the diary. This account has been reconstructed from Dr. Winters's notes and transcriptions of a few selected passages that survived. Several academics have pointed out the odd coincidence that the fire in the archive happened precisely 46 years to the day after the fire that killed Margaret and Elizabeth Blackwood. Those who are familiar with the case continue to speculate as to whether this is just chance or something more significant. For many years, the land where the Blackwood house was located was unoccupied. According to local mythology, workers reported weird events, such as unexplained cold spots, tools moving overnight, and a persistent unidentified smoke odor, which led to the abandonment of multiple attempts to construct on the site. The site was covered over to provide more parking for nearby businesses when Ravens Peak Town expanded its commercial district in 1957. Few locals today recall Margaret Blackwood's story. Only grudgingly do those who do talk about it. An odd conclusion to this tale. In 1965, William Foster, who was at that time an old man still living in Ravens Peak, spoke with a local historian who was studying the history of the town. Foster was said to have become angry and hesitated to speak directly about Margaret Blackwood when questioned about his time at Hargrove & Sons mortuary. But when I paused to listen, all I could hear was the wind. However, a handwritten note in the margin of the historian's transcript suggests that Foster had grown increasingly paranoid in his last months, claiming to see a woman watching him from windows and doorways, a woman he described as pale, with dark hair pinned up in an old-fashioned style. Foster passed away 6 months after this interview from what his death certificate lists as natural causes. After Elias Hargrove passed away in 1949, the Hargrove & Sons mortuary facility on the edge of Ravens Peak was shut down, although it still stands today. Some nights when I walk past that old parking lot, I think I hear music playing, old music, like from a gramophone. It has been owned by a hardware store, a small office building, and most recently a real estate agency over the years. That is the only statement attributed to him on the subject. Late-night workers have periodically complained of unusual cold spots and a faint scent of chemicals that disappears upon closer inspection. Workers found a little chamber concealed in the wall of the former preparation room in 1957 while renovating the space. There was a single blue glass hairpin within, just like the ones Margaret Blackwood was said to have liked. Regarding Margaret Blackwood's last resting place, local records show that she and her mother were interred in Ravens Peak Cemetery. However, no gravestone with the Blackwood name was found when researchers tried to find the grave in 1968 as part of a historical study. The precise location was uncertain due to insufficient cemetery records from that era. The tale of the cadaver lover, as local tradition came to refer to her, has resurfaced on occasion in collections of historical curiosities or regional folklore in the decades that have passed. The spectacular elements, the gruesome picture of a young woman dancing with corpses in the moonlight, are the main emphasis of most reports. Few have made an effort to comprehend Margaret Blackwood as she expressed herself, a lonely person who only found intimacy with people who were unable to discern her wishes or reject her overtures. Winters may have been the closest to making a sympathetic judgment in her last notes before retiring in 1967. In Margaret's writings, we see not a monster, but a woman so profoundly disconnected from the living that she could only forge connections with the dead. Her tragedy was not the unusual nature of her obsession, but the depth of isolation that preceded it. One wonders what might have happened had she found genuine connection among the living. Another item that has never been fully explained was found in the box that held Margaret's diary, a little tarnished locket that contained what analysis determined to be a human hair lock. This object had no accompanying paperwork, so it's unclear if it was one of Margaret's mementos that somehow made it through the fire, or if it was something else. Although the hair could not be conclusively connected to any of the males Margaret named in her journal, it was found to be compatible with samples from the early 20th century. In 1966, a fascinating postscript arose when a researcher looking through Ravens Peak death data discovered a statistical anomaly. The town's mortality rate for men aged 25 to 40 was almost 3 times the national average between January and October of 1922. The researcher observed that this surge had no parallel in other areas over the same time period, even if the majority of deaths could be ascribed to accidents, illnesses, or other known reasons. The results received little attention outside of academic circles despite being published in a little-known historical demography publication. According to some parapsychologists and paranormal researchers, Margaret Blackwood's account is an uncommon instance of emotional imprinting, in which strong emotions leave a sort of mark on actual places. They cite the ongoing claims of strange occurrences near the location of the former Blackwood home and the former mortuary. Naturally, skeptics blame these stories on the strength of suggestion and the propensity of people to see patterns in chance. In the late 1950s, a local writer who tried to do further in-depth investigation on the case described an odd encounter. I had been working late in the county records office, reviewing old newspapers from 1922. As I was leaving, the elderly clerk asked what I was researching. When I mentioned Margaret Blackwood, her expression changed completely. She took my arm and said, very quietly, "Some stories are better left untold. Some names are better left unspoken." She refused to elaborate, but as I was leaving, she added, "If you do write about her, don't work on it after dark, and don't say her name aloud when you're alone. It is undeniable that during those months in 1922, something went horribly wrong in Ravens Peak. Regardless of whether Margaret Blackwood was a disturbed young woman whose fantasies drove her to engage in unimaginable acts with the dead, or if she was just an extremely lonely individual who found comfort in an unusual way, the result is the same. Lives were lost, others were irrevocably changed, and a story was told that still disturbs people almost a century later. The most unsettling thing about Margaret's diaries may not be what she did, but rather how she saw it. There is no indication in her writings that she thought her behavior was improper or unsettling. Instead, she portrays them with a gentleness and everydayness that implies she didn't perceive anything out of the ordinary in her interactions with the deceased. This detachment from traditional moral limits and her failure to acknowledge the deep taboo she was breaking reveal a mind that had constructed its own reality, where the deceased were not actually dead but rather peaceful friends awaiting her attention. Margaret's second-to-last entry, dated the 1st of November 1922, may have captured her worldview the best. The living are so loud with their demands, their judgments, their constant noise. But my beloveds, they wait in perfect patience. They never turn away from my touch. They accept everything I give them. Isn't that what love is supposed to be? Unconditional acceptance. I found what everyone searches for, just not where anyone thought to look. I dreamed of James last night. He came to my window, his clothes still damp from the lake. He said the others were waiting for me. He said there was a place for me among them if I was brave enough to claim it. I woke with the scent of lake water in my nostrils and mud on my bedsheets. Mother doesn't understand why I've been gathering candles, why I've been keeping them hidden beneath my bed. But James understands. James knows what needs to be done. Reads a fragment of what appears to be her last writing, found on a loose sheet tucked between the pages of the bound diary. Whether read as a record of mental illness, a reflection of human loneliness, or just an unsettling historical curiosity, Margaret Blackwood's diary serves as a reminder that when a mind dwells on itself for an extended period of time, the lines separating love and possession, connection and obsession, can become dangerously hazy. It acts as a warning that extreme and protracted seclusion can distort perception to the point where the unfathomable is not only possible, but even desirable. The parking area that covers the location of the Blackwood residence fills and empties in time with the workday as the sun sets over what was once Ravens Peak, which is now mostly absorbed into the growing town of Adirondack Heights. You who park there are aware that they are in the exact spot where Margaret used to reside, where she stored her box of souvenirs under the floorboards, and where she ultimately, if the fire marshal's suspicions were right, set her own narrative on fire. Margaret's genuine diary may still be in existence somewhere, possibly in a private collection or archive, as it was never completely destroyed in the 1968 fire. Or it can be a ghost story about a woman who liked ghosts, existing only in the notes and recollections of those who experienced it briefly. The faint tones of a gramophone playing to an audience that no longer breathes, led by a dancer whose steps faltered almost a century ago, might be imagined, in any case, on some calm nights, in the hours between midnight and dawn, when the earth holds its breath. Both the Blackwood home fire and James Thornton's disturbed grave have long since been closed by the local authorities. According to the final sheriff's report from December 1922, the official position was that there was no proof linking these incidents other than their unfortunate timing. However, rumors that Margaret had somehow escaped the fire, that the body claimed to be hers was actually her mother's, and that she had escaped to another town to carry on with her gruesome activities, lingered for decades. Even though there is no solid proof for these rumors, they demonstrate the enduring influence her story had on Ravens Peak's collective imagination. Workers discovered what looked to be a small metal box buried several feet below the foundation of the former Blackwood residence in 1958 while building the parking lot. It will probably never be known whether this box held more of Margaret's writings or mementos. The local newspapers said that the foreman ordered the box to be reburied without being opened, saying he wanted no part of whatever curse might be attached to that place. In the years after the Blackwood tragedy, an odd trend became apparent. Between 1923 and 1940, at least 7 separate mortuary workers in communities within a 50-mile radius of Ravens Peak had strange events. According to documents assembled by amateur historian Martin Dunleavy in 1964, these include hearing music in unoccupied preparation rooms and discovering bodies that have been moved overnight. Each employee reported seeing a dark-haired, pale young woman in or close to their workplace, but none of them could identify her or provide an explanation for her appearance. Skeptics point out that such tales probably circulated through professional networks, resulting in an unfounded, self-sustaining legend. According to Dr. Samuel Thornton's, no related to James Thornton 1930-1000, medical records, he treated 3 distinct patients for mortuary obsession, an odd preoccupation with the deceased and funeral customs. Dr. Thornton's proposed paper on the topic was never published, and the medical establishment of the time rejected his theories. In his private notes, he speculated about a possible contagious nature to certain psychological disturbances, specifically citing the Blackwood incident as a potential origin point. A small addendum to this entry, written in a steadier hand, reads, "Through the flames I will join them forever. Mother will understand finally, when we are both on the other side. And William, he will remember me every time he prepares a body. He will look at their still faces and wonder if they are waiting for me." Margaret's final words, scrawled into the last page of her diary, in a handwriting so frantic that it tore through the paper in places. "They don't understand. They never will. But my beloveds understand, and I will return to them one way or another." As part of her master's thesis, a psychology student at Albany State University tried to examine Margaret's situation in 1962. Although controversial, her conclusion provides perhaps the most fair assessment. Margaret Blackwood's documented behavior suggests a profound dissociative disorder, likely triggered by the combination of her father's death and her subsequent immersion in the world of mortuary science. Her inability to connect with the living led her to project relationship dynamics onto the dead, who could neither reject nor abandon her. The escalation of her behaviors indicates a progressive detachment from consensual reality, culminating in what appears to have been a final psychotic break. What makes her case unique, though, is not the nature of her delusions, but the complex internal logic she developed to justify them, a worldview in which her actions were not only acceptable, but meaningful and beautiful. Elaine Carter, a psychology student, dropped her thesis shortly after submitting this preliminary analysis. Her lone message to her advisor was, "I've been dreaming about her. I need to step away from this project." According to university records, she never brought up the topic again after switching to another program. A film student who claimed to be studying local history came to Ravens Peak in the fall of 1964 and tried to record the sites connected to Margaret Blackwood's story. His incomplete video, found in the university archives in 1970, includes multiple panning pictures of the town cemetery, the parking area where the Blackwood residence formerly stood, and the outside of the former Hargrove and Sons mortuary. The movie ends with a fuzzy image of a woman dressed in what looks to be early 20th century clothing standing among the far-off gravestones. According to university records, the student left no forwarding address and left his program shortly after this visit. Howard Jenkins, the son of Harold Jenkins, who found the disturbed tomb in 1922, was the caretaker of Ravens Peak Cemetery from 1950 to 1968. He kept a journal of odd events that happened on the property. In 1955, he wrote, "Always arranged the same way. Never seen who leaves them, though I've watched for years." One of the notes makes reference to the regular appearance of fresh flowers on unmarked graves in the cemetery's oldest portion. These flowers are always the same types, lilies and violets. An old woman was discovered walking Ravens Peak Cemetery at daybreak in 1966, which may be the most bizarre side note to the Blackwood case. She identified herself as Margaret when questioned by local police and said she was visiting my friends. According to records, She was sent to an Albany hospital where she was given a dementia diagnosis and subsequently placed in a care home. She passed away 6 months later, and her true identity was never revealed. According to the police report, she was singing what one officer identified as Tchaikovsky's Waltz of the Flowers and had a little blue glass hairpin on her person when they discovered her. Perhaps the most appropriate conclusion is provided by Dr. Eleanor Winters's last evaluation of the Blackwood case, which she wrote just before she retired. The story of Margaret Blackwood serves as a reminder of how easily the human mind can create its own reality when driven by profound loneliness and isolation. Whether we view her through the lens of mental illness, as a tragic figure, or as the central character in a local ghost story, her diary reveals a universal truth: the desperate human need for connection, even when that connection transgresses the boundaries between life and death. In her distorted way, Margaret sought what we all seek: to be seen, to be touched, to be loved. That her search led her into darkness speaks not only to her own brokenness, but to the failure of her community to recognize and respond to a soul in desperate need. The main way that Margaret Blackwood's legacy endures is as a warning story that is passed down among upstate New York funeral staff. Among them, an odd custom has developed. New hires are cautioned not to wait alone after midnight, not to play music in the waiting area, and not to call the deceased by name when no one else is around. Older employees frequently give a serious expression and cryptic answers to questions regarding the origins of these superstitions, such as, "Remember the cadaver lover." Regarding Ravens Peak itself, the town has mostly forgotten the woman who used to stroll its streets during the day and dance with its deceased at night. She used to work in a morgue, but now it's a real estate agency, with cheery signs and windows. She is accused of disturbing at least one grave at a remodeled and extended cemetery. Even the oldest people may be reluctant to mention the weird young woman who lived near the funeral home because they may only remember hearing rumors about her. However, residents occasionally report a strange occurrence on some nights when the moon is hidden by clouds and the wind is carrying the aroma of impending snow. The soft sound of classical music permeating the town's oldest section, while there is what sounds like the rhythmic tread of footsteps on a wooden floor. Those who have experienced it claim it always fades when approached, like a radio being slowly turned down, leaving behind only the normal sounds of the night and the lingering question of whether it was ever there at all. The tale of Margaret Blackwood, the cadaver lover of Ravens Peak, is ultimately neither entirely clarified nor entirely discounted. It remains unsettling because, like many stories that linger in the murky lands between recorded history and folklore, it raises the possibility that the lines separating the living from the dead, between love and obsession, and between sanity and insanity, may be far more brittle than we would like to acknowledge. A gramophone still stands someplace, maybe in a silent room where no one has touched the dust in decades, ready to play a waltz for lovers who are divided by the thinnest of veils, the one who dances and the one who only shows up.